Greetings adventurers, and welcome to the Loot Goblin Marketplace. One of the hardest parts about identifying a bad campaign is that they rarely start bad. Many of them have great world building, fun roleplay moments, and cool characters with a lot of potential. The red flags are still there, but you're thinking about the upcoming boss fight, and honestly that problem player hasn't really been annoying enough for long enough, so it really hasn't gotten on your nerves yet. Many campaigns are usually salvageable with a little bit of compromise or a swift kick of a problem player. The campaigns that you really have to watch out for are the ones where external factors make it impossible for this campaign to ever end in anything but tragedy. If someone is trying to use Dungeons and Dragons as a game of leverage over the friend group, you know that you're going to be in for a bad time. A person that is willing to use a fun game with friends as a method to manipulate and control those around them is also probably doing something even more sinister behind the scene. Today's treasure was submitted at lootgoblinstories@gmail.com, and it's called the Cottage-core Control Freak Saga, Story 1 being called Misery Business. Hi there, I'm the writer for the Cherry the Drow Cleric story, and I'm glad my shitty D&D experience gave you guys some entertainment. I decided to tell another story about a campaign that ended in disaster, with more problems outside the game than within. Time for some setup. I was part of a voice acting project a few years ago, and during one of the rehearsals, I overheard our director saying he was part of a D&D game with one of the other actors and his mutual friend as the game master. I was looking for a new game to play, being stuck as the forever GM for so long, so I asked to join. I got an invite not too long after that and started working on my character with the GM. Two things I noticed right off the bat. This GM was extremely generous with stats and magic items. This wasn't a bad thing. In fact, I was used to games where resources were scarce and stat boosts were limited, so it was a pleasant surprise. He even made a mechanic for learning different feats during downtime, which was stupidly busted. I fell in love with it, and I still use it to this day. By the end of the campaign, my character was more broken than any level 9 barbarian has any right to be. The GM was blind. This wasn't too weird for me, my ex-girlfriend was blind, as was my voice acting director. So while this would prove challenging since I don't know a lot of blind game masters, I understood he needed some accommodations. The GM had a text-to-speech installation that he used to read out text messages, Discord calls, while we were playing our games, and documents. So instead of using character sheet, PDFs, Google Docs, or Roll20 like I was used to, we made documents on Notepad that had all our stats and backstory on it so the text-to-speech could read it out loud to him. We also used this unique dice roller chat room that worked with the text-to-speech. Not as flashy as Roll20, but it got the job done. Even though he had the setup, he still preferred other people to read out loud for him, namely a certain player. To summarize the plot, we were all part of a bounty hunters guild that gave us jobs going after anyone or anything with a bounty on its head, from bandits and war criminals to giant worms and basilisks. Slay monsters, bring people in dead or alive, collect the reward, rinse and repeat. It got more complex, involving warmongering mages and secret rebel forces, which became the main plot later on. I'll be addressing the players by their character names, no real names here. Without further ado, here's the characters that will be relevant to this story. First, there's Milo, my halfling bear totem barbarian with high charisma, well, for barbarians, who loved to cook. He was a hot-blooded but well-meaning farmer who sought out the adventuring life solely to help pay the land taxes on his family's farm and support his mother and little sister. He was the group's damage sponge, DPS, and gourmet chef who cooked up every monster they found into scrumptious meals a la Delicious in Dungeon, and became the mediator when things got heated during inter-party conflict. Basically, Milo was the big brother everyone could lean on. Well yeah, it's pretty easy to lean on him, he's a halfling after all. He also went by the name Little Bear because I thought it was a funny nickname, but would later get a bear cub spirit familiar that would help him out of combat, so the name oddly fit. Then there was Leah, a halfling archfey warlock who made a pact with Titania, the Summer Queen. She started out as an apprentice artificer working for our crazy gnome quest giver, Professor Bimblebottom, before throwing a bit of warlock into the mix. She had a fondness for inventing, found family, and heists. She and Milo would end up starting a relationship because our characters had great rapport, and Leah's player and I became good friends out of character. Then there was Misery, a tiefling moon druid, and the problem player at this table. She was dating the game master, and was the group's dedicated healer. She was also tuned to the cottage briefcase. I'll explain what that is later. She had a love of children, had a toxic I can fix him relationship with the genie, and acted like the party's bratty little sister. She got into an argument at least once a session, either with me, Leah, or the GM. At first, I thought this was all in character, and was just part of some inner party banter she was committed to, but over time I realized that she had very thin skin, and would argue with you until she got the last word in, or prove she was right. This wasn't too annoying at first. Her arguments were over petty stuff that could be brushed off, so I didn't notice the obvious red flag until I was in too deep. Then there was the Game Master, a newbie to D&D that took up the GM role as an excuse to hang out with friends on a constant basis. A pretty chill guy who was likely to smoke a bowl or crack open a beer while running to relax. Truly the Snoop Dogg of D&D. He would theater of the mind his fantasy world due to his physical limitations. He's a people pleaser and worked hard to make sure everyone enjoyed themselves, hence why he's so generous when it came to character advancement. But this part of him made him take Misery's side during the arguments since they were dating. He was pretty ignorant to or ignored the many red flags she displayed each game. We had a few other players such as a centaur paladin, a human rogue, and a tiefling wizard, but none of them stayed longer than a few sessions before their players dipped out of the campaign. For most of these guys, there was either a scheduling conflict, other tasks taking priority, or just lack of interest in D&D. So Milo, Leah, and Misery ended up being the core group. This was kind of disappointing because the people that I originally joined the group to play with, the human rogue and the centaur paladin, had left only a few sessions after my arrival. I have to imagine that the GM and Leah felt the same since the human rogue was their mutual friend, while Misery and I were outsiders to this group. I did my best to soldier on and make the best of this campaign, since this was the only one I was a player in at the time. But was it worth it? Well, despite the story going all over the place in terms of priorities, and getting confused over where we were relative to our goal, since this was all theater of the mind, I did get invested in this ragtag team, and I liked playing Milo. He was the chill and confident character that was the self-esteem booster I needed in real life, so I was happy to keep playing him. The relationship between Leah and Milo that developed over the campaign was sweet and saucy, plus our friendship was developing out of character too. But for me, there was one drawback early on. To give context, Misery was attuned to this magic item we colloquially called the cottage / the briefcase. I'll be calling it either or interchangeably. It was a carrier-sized briefcase that, when opened, would lead down a set of stairs into a small inhabitable pocket dimension that housed a cottage big enough for the party to live comfortably inside. It's like if you stuffed Leomund's tiny hut into a bag of holding, or like that petting zoo briefcase in the Fantastic Beasts series. On paper, this sounds pretty optimal, since this meant that we always had a safe place to sleep while we took long rests in the wild. However, this became the only place we were allowed to sleep. I'm not sure why she was so fixated on this, but Misery, in character and out of character, would insist on us always staying in the cottage whenever we had to rest or have a group meeting. Renting a room in a local tavern? Nope, we stay in the cottage. Traveling down the road together? Nope, the party stays in the cottage while Misery carries us along. Okay, that one specifically is really weird. Infiltrating a city while working on a plan of action or gathering clues? Nope, we talk in the cottage and just let Misery look for clues. Sleeping on Milo's farm to meet his family, which was basically an extension of trust from Milo to the party? Nope, we sleep in the cottage. I realize this sounds very practical on paper. We had a powerful magic item which was our own portable sanctuary. Why not use it? For example, the city we were infiltrating did house enemy mages, who would scry on us whenever they wanted, so it makes sense why we discussed our plan inside the cottage. But you have to understand, Misery always insisted we use that damn thing, and that she was the only one to hold it because she was the one attuned to the item. I can only think of one time where someone other than Misery held the cottage. It was Milo, for anyone curious, and that was it. It felt less like a convenient and safe transport, and more like we were trapped in a confined space with no way to interact with the fantasy world or leave unless Misery allowed it, which wasn't often, combat aside. We could only see the world outside through a little cottage window, but no one could see us. Over time, I just got used to it. I stopped asking and just assumed we would always stay in the cottage when it was downtime, almost like a cottage-core Stockholm syndrome. We also got an airship later in the campaign, and the same thing happened. We needed it as a way to get to this secret elf island in the later half of the campaign, and we only made one stop at a town to resupply. No taking part in the different cultures, no enjoying the sights and sounds, so to speak, just observing them from a distance as we charted through the skies like an airborne NEAT. I'm pretty sure Misery was pissy we didn't use the cottage anymore now that we had the airship. Even trying to get our own stuff from her was like pulling teeth. Misery also had a bag of holding, which stored party loot. Whenever anyone tried to grab some gold or anything we needed from the bag, Misery would say no. though. She protested that she's the only one attuned to the bag of holding, and only she could decide what goes in and out. Even though bags of holding don't require attunement, Leah's player even got the book out to prove it to the GM and Misery, who would only let the ruling go through begrudgingly. You may have noticed that we had a tendency to have our characters entrapped in confined spaces or told what to do, and I believe I know why. This is all speculation on my part, but I believe Misery had a thing about control and wanted to make sure all the players and characters were exactly where she expected them to be at all times, and didn't try to do anything under her nose or piss her off. This is something I only speculate in hindsight when contemplating the downfall of this campaign, because all these traits come back in disturbing ways later on. Anyway, back to the story. We spent the first 5 or so sessions hunting down and slaying monsters, using their raw materials to create accessories and consumables for us to sell or use ourselves, and collecting reward money. It was a pretty standard Monster Hunter style affair. That all changed with the introduction of the big bad evil guy, the Council of Nine. They were an evil council of archmages that were bent on world domination and advancing the study of magic through unethical means. They were settled in a highly protected, snowy region city called Icespire, where the citizens lived in fear of their ruler's wrath. I can't remember why we were going to Icespire. It was either to rescue someone, there was a bounty put on the council's head, or some other third option. But we infiltrated the city and later their castle. We had to fight a few apprentice wizards and guards in the sewers before sneaking our way up through the 9 towers of the castle, each of which housed a study for each archmage. We split the party, I know the cardinal sin of D&D, to cover more ground. Milo and Misery found a list of prisoners that were not criminals, but rather enemies to the council, that were being prepped for execution or experiments. Leah discovered one of the archmage's studies and started looting the place clean. That's when we found a small Medusa girl. The girl seemed scared at first, but non-threatening. So Leah was able to resist the petrifying gaze, calmed her down, and got her to tell her story. She had been in this tower for as long as she could remember, and was part of some arcane medical experiments by her archmage master. Leah took pity on her and cast invisibility on the Medusa so she could escape the castle with us. From there, our primary mission was to get the crew together, free the Medusa and the other prisoners, and get them all into the cottage so we could take them to our hub town in one piece. That was easier said than done. One of the archmages cast Time Stop and took the little girl. Once it wore off, Milo and Misery went after her. I believe Leah went back into the cottage because her player was dealing with in real life stuff. Misery found the archmage first and tried to fight him, but to no avail. She quickly lost and was near death when Milo showed up to defend her. The GM and I rolled initiative, and a pretty damn epic 1v1 fight between Milo and the archmage started, while Misery got herself and the Medusa into the cottage. The archmage kept throwing everything he had at Milo, but the halfling wouldn't go down. Milo was down to the single digits, but came out victorious, slicing the mage's head off with a +2 golden sword. Milo was only level 6, and managed to slay the level 18 archmage with a combination of dumb luck and using every resource that tough little guy had to keep his HP stable, plus all those free bonus feats, I guess. It was the first time I felt like our characters were a ride or die team and would face down any threat to protect each other. This was one of the highlights of the campaign for me. Honestly, Briefcase aside, it does sound like a lot of fun. Once the archmage was defeated, Misery healed up Milo, we made our way to the prison, and started a fight with the warden, who was another powerful mage. He cast Wall of Force around himself and the prison cells, which stumped the party for a few rounds, as Milo wailed on it to no avail. With some ingenuity with Misery and Leah's spellcasting, we were able to break the mage's concentration, kick his butt, and help the prisoners escape. Once we got out of the city, Milo was pretty much public enemy number 1. You see, Milo was the one carrying the briefcase at the time, so he's the one that became the target of the council. Man, the one time you get to hold it and now you're public enemy number 1. That almost feels planned a little bit there, honestly. They were prominent at the world stage, and had enough political sway to ruin our lives. As such, once we got back into the hub town, and the escapees were settled in, including Bimblebottom taking on the Medusa as an apprentice, Milo grew out his beard and changed his hair. He had to stay in disguise for this half of the campaign, and went by the name Barry McBear, traveling chef. There are a few other things that happened, like Milo and Leah getting together, everyone meeting Milo's family, Misery meeting her toxic genie boyfriend, Milo discovering more about his estranged father, getting his bear cub familiar, and even meeting a rock that was a friend of his father. I'll leave these plot points out, just so this story isn't as long as a Tolkien novel. Next story will be focusing on the time skip. Yep, there was a time time skip. The GM hadn't expected us to so effectively and easily get out of Icespire and take out one of his big bad evil guys, so he put the game on hiatus until he could retool things to make the encounters more intense. He even asked me to help him make text files on all the NPC mage stat blocks you can find in Volo's guide. I wanted to help out our first time GM and someone with a pretty major disability so he could enjoy the hobby I love, even if it gave me more busy work. For now, we'll wrap up this half of the tale. The next story will be focusing on the last parts of the campaign, the interpersonal conflicts of the players and the GM, and finally what broke apart the campaign. I was trying not to interrupt this story a lot because I actually really liked how it flowed. The author does a great job identifying what the red flags are, but also I think he did a really good job pointing out why this game was still fun to him. I get that misery is really annoying as someone to have at the table, and it's even more frustrating that they're dating the GM because then that person's gonna always rule in their favor. But there was a lot of really cool moments. I could see why people stuck around. I actually really don't know what I would do here if I joined a campaign, had a couple mutual friends playing with me, and then after like game 3 they leave. I feel like if I was having a good time and my mutual friends left after like 3 sessions, I would probably try to stick it out too. Maybe the moment things became really annoying, I would dip out. Maybe it's how this is written, but this is one of the few long horror stories where I actually kind of get why they stuck around. Clearly there was enough fun stuff happening in the story where it felt worth it, even for the slow moments where misery took all like the stealth and the investigation checks. The second story goes by the name Misery Loves Company. This part here comes after the time skip. We were all trapped on an airship, frozen in the ice after some time had passed in game. Somehow we escaped and soared our vessel towards our next destination, a secret elf island that relates to Milo's dad. He's a mighty warrior helping a rebel force fight against the Council of Nine, who turns out were a smaller branch of an even bigger cabal of mages that were amassing an army to take over the land. What is this, like the Council of 18, or is there even more of them? How big is this cabal? Milo had received a message from his dad that he was helping the elves fight the Council of Nine, so of course Milo said the party should totally go over there, not just to kick some archmage butt, but also to deal with his daddy issues and finally connect with his cool and mysterious father. Basically, this became the Milo arc. We traveled along the air with no complications, well except within the party. Milo played peacemaker to any bickering between Misery and Leah, who were really giving it to each other as the sessions went on. I took it as them being in character, but found out the real reason later on. Around this time, Leah and Milo started getting closer. She told him about her backstory being an orphan and surviving on her own, agreeing to an Archfey pact in order to get some kind of love. Their romance blossomed as Leah relied on Milo for emotional support, and Milo admired her resilience and cunning. So on the way to the island, Milo proposed to Leah. On a personal note, this whole plot point came up after I had broken up with my girlfriend of 5 years, so having a natural romance work out between Leah's player and I helped with my self-esteem issues while still in my grief-stricken state. I know it helped out Leah for reasons we'll talk about later. Thanks Milo and Leah for helping mediate my depression. Once we arrived on the island, we talked with the elves and convinced them we were allies, largely thanks to Milo's dad vouching for them. From there, we supplied the airship, learned about their culture as well as the strong supply of ancient magic they were protecting from the Council of Nine, and negotiated to let us join one of the fights by their side. Milo got some quality time with his dad as well as Leah, basically saying he can't wait for this war to be over so he can have one big happy family. In one session, we had a battle scene where we fought a horde of cannon fodder soldiers and one commander. We did this about 3 times. I had fun with the simple war mechanics. As a side note, war mechanics are super hard to do in D&D, so I appreciated this GM for implementing mechanics that were fun and easy to understand. Anyway, the battle culminated with Milo's dad falling and Milo pulling him back behind lines to receive medical aid. Misery didn't really do much at this point aside from combat. She was mainly pining for the Medusa child, who she basically treated like a daughter, and most of her downtime was either bickering with Milo and Leah or praying to the moon for the Medusa's safety and hope that she was okay after the time skip. Oh, and she still had her bad boy evil genie NPC played by the GM that she was trying to fix in this toxic romance that in hindsight reflects their in real life relationship a lot, but we'll get to that later. They've alluded to this a lot. I really want to know what's going on here. We'll be there shortly. I think I missed a few sessions after the battle. I say I think because the party went from an island of elves with massive wizard battles in one session to traveling through the forest to find some ancient tower in another. I don't remember what the connection was between one plot point to the next, text, so I'm just gonna assume that I wasn't there. Either that or we teleported. It was 2 years ago, so sadly the details are lost in the fog of my short-term memory. Our final sessions involved some kind of Fae-based quest where some pixie had us break into an evil wizard's tower to rescue a halfling bard, our newest player character from a new player. We'll call them Veronica. After a few fights with the guards, we found the bard and Milo used a nat 20 athletics check to help her escape her bonds. Veronica immediately had the hots for Milo and started flirting with him. This made Leah jealous, and we had a few brief moments where they would bicker over Milo like something out of the Archie comics with Betty and Veronica. I thought that it might be a fun angle to explore, with Milo letting this new girl down easy while still making her a valuable party member. That did not happen, as this was basically our final session. And before you ask, Veronica wasn't some kind of troublemaker like Misery was, and there wasn't some harem anime horniness going on with them, as far as I know. I mean, to be honest, I was thinking that. I'm glad you clarified there. They were good friends with Leah's player, and they still talk to each other this day. They came in with the mindset to bring some spicy drama to their character and add a bit of flavor to the game. I lost contact with them after the campaign ended, so if you happen to read this story, I just want you to know that you're a pretty cool guy. Thanks for being a bright spot in the last moments of this game. After that session, Leah kinda suddenly left the campaign, and the GM asked if we still wanted to continue next week. While we could play with Milo, Misery, and Veronica, it didn't feel right for me to play without Leah, so I suggested we postpone until or if she returned, which they reluctantly agreed to. A couple of days after Leah's player left, I was chatting with her on direct messages and asked her how she was doing. She told me she was struggling, and when I asked why, I found out how much shit she had gone through behind the scenes and why she felt the need to leave the campaign, and it all traced back to Misery's player and the GM. I'm going to spend the next part of this going between petty nitpicks of out-of-character stuff Misery's player and the GM did that I didn't put into the first story, and going over more serious allegations that were done to Leah's player and the main reason I'm writing this story. If the tone feels a little scrambled, I apologize. I'll do my best to make this part as coherent as possible. One additional note, I was given permission by Leah's player to talk about her side of the story, but I will leave out certain details out of respect. You'll see why later. I was pretty flippant about making time for the campaign later on. This was because the game master didn't seem to take it too seriously. I noticed on several occasions he and Misery got higher drunk while we were in session. It made the GM more relaxed while playing, but also meant he would ask for stuff like strength or charisma checks, kind of forgetting that skill checks like athletics or persuasion were a thing. We had to remind him, and he kind of hand-waved it with a sure okay, but never kept it in mind. To clarify, I have nothing against weed or alcohol, or even using them while gaming, but I think there is a time and a place to get a little silly, like during a drinking game one-shot, but this is an epic campaign we played every week, and we were expected to take seriously. As someone who's been a game master before, I knew how much stuff you had to keep track of, and I couldn't do so high or drunk. The GM couldn't either. There were certain points where he forgot what we were doing in the story mid-rip, and needed reminders of what had happened so far. At that point, I stopped caring so much about the rules or the story, because clearly the GM didn't care. It became a turn your brain off, dumb fun kind of adventure, and it was pretty fun on that level, but it wasn't enough to keep me coming back week after week. I do remember that Leah's players' kids would come out of their rooms during game weed time, and she would have to excuse herself to take them back into their rooms. Right, that's something else to bring up in the previous story. So Leah's player was a single mother of two coming out of a messy, abusive marriage. She was too far away from her parents and didn't have anywhere else to keep her and her kids safe from her ex, so the GM and Misery's players offered her to stay with them. They let her stay for the short term, providing a safe place to support her kids until she got back on her feet. So she hopped states and moved in as soon as possible. That's when the problems started. One thing that I didn't mention about Misery's player is that she was a flirt, but not the kind of flirt that would playfully banter with you, but the kind to give you the cold shoulder after you rejected her, and then gaslight you to believe she never flirted with you to begin with. I know because she flirted with me around the time when we first met, and when I said I wasn't interested, she acted like she wasn't flirting with me at all. Until then, I never thought the "it's not like I like you" or anything baka tsundere anime trope was a real behavior people did. Misery's player proved me wrong. As soon as Leah's player moved in, the GM and Misery's player asked if she wanted to join them in a throuple. Yes, she left an abusive relationship and wanted to be somewhere safe, and the people she just moved in with immediately asked her to join them for sex. She told them no, and they seemed to accept that answer. However, they would keep bringing it up over and over again. To this day, Leah's player believes that the downward spiral events that happened was because she didn't want to have sex with either of them. Leah's player also discovered some weird drama going on with Misery's player, who was also talking with an older guy that wanted to invite her as a third into his marriage. She wouldn't tell the guy no, but she would tell the GM that this guy wouldn't stop hitting on her. Yeah, imagine, that sounds really annoying, right, Misery? Can't relate at all to Leah's plight, I guess. So he'd get mad and defensive, and want to know the guy's handle so he could talk to him man to man. Misery's player would act scared and tell him she wouldn't talk to him anymore, only for her to continue talking to him the next day. This went on for several weeks. Leah's player got curious after the drama was loudly argued about continuously and read over Misery's player's shoulder one day to check her messages. Misery's player never told this other guy she was in a relationship or that she wasn't interested in joining him, so she was stringing him along just for the drama and excitement, or perhaps some polyamorous situationship that she was going to propose later. While their drama was messy and high school-like, Leah's player could have dealt with it if they kept it separate from her and she focused on work. That brings up another problem. While Leah's player was living with the GM and Misery's player, she would help them cover their rent as soon as she got a job. Seems reasonable considering they were letting her live under their roof. The problem was that they constantly lied about what the bills were. She'd given them money for what she assumed was half of the utility bills, and they'd spend it on other things and fall behind. And then the next month the bills were twice as high, and they'd want Leah to pay more than half of it. They got upset with her when she started demanding to see the bills instead of doing what she was told and going by what they said the bills were. Going back to less serious D&D drama, I couldn't find a good place to put this but here. Leah's player revealed that during games, Misery's player was constantly cheating. Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised by hearing that. It seems like it's a common theme here, in and out of game. She would fudge dice rolls either by adding in bonuses or rolling with advantage when she wasn't supposed to. Would jump on the GM's computer while he was working and read over the campaign notes to find out what happens next. Then she would confront the GM and whine to him to change what's going to happen next session, so it either makes her look like the main character or satisfies her needs. Like the Medusa child, she wasn't supposed to be a surrogate daughter, nor the genie being her lover. They were supposed to be throwaway characters, but Misery's player demanded that their personalities change to suit her fantasies. I wouldn't be surprised if she demanded the GM makes the briefcase be the party's only place they could stay, just so she continued to get preferential treatment. Well, more than the rest of us got. Leah got little to no development compared to Misery and Milo. I still feel bad about that in hindsight. I mean, honestly, I feel like you shouldn't. It seems like they have it out for Leah. I'm sure if she was in the throuple, they'd treat her way better than you. They kind of just seem like petty people. Leah's player watched her do it countless times, even straight up lie to the GM's face when she got caught. She used the fact that he's blind to take advantage of his trust in her, but God forbid Leah's player say anything. Misery's player would end up making it sound like she's the one causing the issues. The GM would constantly turn a blind eye, no pun intended, and go along with whatever Misery's player wanted, presumably because she was a more forceful personality and he didn't want to ruin their relationship. The happy wife, happy life mentality taken to a toxic extreme. Though the GM and Misery's player used to fight over some petty stuff, so they didn't exactly have a stable household, such as the married guy Misery's player was stringing along, or when Misery's player wouldn't get what she wanted. I've never heard many of these arguments in session, but it goes to show that Misery's player's little argumentative behavior wasn't just her playing her bratty tiefling druid. It's just a core part of her own bratty personality. She expected everyone to fall in line with what she wanted and wouldn't take no for an answer. I'm just gonna quickly read here what the trigger warning was that made me decide to skip over the rest of the story. Trigger warning. The following part of the story gets really heavy. It includes manipulation, entrapment, abuse towards children, and implications of grooming. To clarify further, these points are allegations, so there's nothing legally proven to what Leah's player revealed to me, so take what I say with a pinch of salt. If any of this is too intense for you, you can stop reading and move on to the next part of the story, which will be the epilogue. The reason I skipped over this trigger warning is because honestly, it is maybe a little too dark for this channel. Let's just say that bad D&D antics and badgering for sex was bad enough. There was some other stuff outlined where Leah Leah wasn't completely comfortable sharing all the allegations. This is a situation where I really appreciate that Leah goes in graphic detail on a police report as opposed to Reddit, because truthfully, the parts that are hinted at here afterwards are so bad it enters true crime territory and not RPG horror story territory. I feel really bad that Leah met this person through D&D and had to be subjected to this. After the author learned of all this stuff that was happening behind the scenes, obviously they found an excuse to leave, and then they did, which ultimately leads us to the epilogue. Oh, the misery. It's been at least 2 years since the campaign fell apart, and a lot has happened since then. I'm gonna keep this part fairly short since I don't have much else to add other than the epilogue and some final thoughts. I keep in contact with Leah's player from time to time, and thankfully she's okay. She's gotten a secure job in a different part of the state, and she and her kids are living in a pretty stable community away from Misery's player and the GM. I haven't spoken to GM and Misery's players in many years. I think it's better it stays that way. I want to wrap up this saga by saying that, at first, I was really invested in this campaign. I wasn't playing a lot of D&D at the time and needed some escape from the crappy aspects of my life. I even drew art of all the characters because I really did enjoy the game to start with. As much as I want to say I'll still remember the good times despite the bad, that wouldn't be honest. Hearing about every foul deed Misery's player and the GM did, having still received no justice as far as I know, it made any goodwill I had for this game and the benefit of the doubt I gave the GM and the Misery's player wither and die. I feel like an idiot trying to make this group dynamic work. All the fun roleplay and epic battles, all the help I gave the GM and the art, I made now leave a bad taste in my mouth because they're connected to these rotten people and all the pain they've caused. I have to wonder if Leah feels the same way too. The players who bowed out of this campaign were fortunate to have missed this madness. While I did go through some annoying nonsense, I don't see myself as the victim of this tale anymore. The stuff I went through is mundane compared to Leah's player, which is why I wanted to shine a light on her side of things. Abuse like this should never happen at the game table. You give a lot of trust to your players and the GM not to take advantage of you when you sit at the game table, especially when you're at your lowest. Unfortunately, so many do take advantage, and you don't know who's a predator and who has your best interests at heart before it's too late. The story really took a dark turn towards the end there, and I just honestly wish Leah the best. The more I read these horror stories, the more I see individuals who have really awful personalities behind the scenes leverage many of the same tactics in-game to get what they want. The lesson that I found from it, and I'm hoping that people take away from this epilogue, is that if you feel like something has gone from it just being uncomfortable at the game table into the realm of actual crime, instead of going to r/RPG horror stories and explaining the story in detail there, do what Leah did and fill out a police report. Because truthfully, no matter what miscommunication or small thing might have happened at the game table, there is no world where even the problem player at a table should be getting crimes committed upon them and their children. When you're listening to something that's an RPG horror story, you expect to be frustrated, maybe relieved that it's not your table, but you shouldn't be feeling like you're hearing the making of a true crime podcast. Just make sure to reach out to people that can help with the situation. Redditors will tell you they're the proper authorities on a lot of things, but trust me when I say they are not the authorities you should be talking to in this situation. I really enjoyed your Cherry the Drow story, and while I couldn't read this story in its entirety, I still wanted to talk about it, touch upon the darker sides lightly, and just share that I'm really sorry to hear this happen to you and Leah, and it seems like the cozy cottage-core briefcase and her need for control was like that tip of a truly terrifying iceberg. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had someone at the table that did something you didn't think much of it because it's like, oh, you know, maybe they're being like cruel in game because like they're playing out a character, and then they were that exact same person out of game? I've definitely had my fair share of people who were like control freaks that would have meltdowns in game, and then out of game you see them have like a very similar style of meltdown when their life isn't going their way. It kind of feels weird to do the YouTuber thing here where I'm like, oh, like, subscribe, hype, all that. So I'm going to speed through that and just say I hope to see you in the next video. I promise it's not going to be this dark. Farewell for now. Hey kid, want to try some gamer subs? You can now get free samples anywhere in the world and try the most delicious 0-calorie energy powder in the game when you use code lootgoblin. Each sample sent out gets me one step closer to my quest to get a flavor that tastes suspiciously like Dr. Pepper. If you end up liking those free samples and want to purchase some gamer subs, make sure to use the link in the description or use my code to get 10% off your entire order.